Well, my name is Mariana Aghazadian. Right now I'm actually retired. I was the executive director for Parent Information Center of Delaware for over 25 years. And at the same time, I was also on the board of Autism Delaware. I'm currently the vice president of Autism Delaware, an advocacy organization for families of individuals with autism. And that's kind of my most recent history. I have two children, Stefan, who has autism, who brought me here today, and Megan, who is in education and lives far away in Austin, Texas.
So tell us a little bit about your own childhood.
My own childhood, I grew up I was born in Paris. I grew up in France and Germany. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents who lived in Berlin, vacations, and I actually spent a couple of years in Berlin. So they insisted that I continue to learn German and keep my German fluent. And then, the rest of my time I went to school in France. I went to boarding school. My parents had a house in Brittany, and we went to Brittany in the summer on the seashore. And when I was 19, I came to America to attend college in California. And I have godparents, or sadly to say had godparents, who sponsored me to come over, and who were really, for many years, my American parents. So that's my childhood.
Did you have any experience with autism?
No.
No.
Actually, when our son was 2.5, we had noticed, he was born in New York City, Lenox Hill Hospital. At the time we lived in Manhattan, and we didn't notice anything at birth. We did notice shortly after birth that he had a lot of difficulties, digestive difficulties. He was very restless, didn't sleep much. So by the time, but then he was slow in developing, but nothing terribly, worrisome. Certainly not enough to worry the pediatrician. But then by the time he was 2, we noticed that he wasn't speaking, he wasn't interacting with other children. We really thought something was off. For a while we attributed to the fact that I was traveling back and forth between New York and Paris to visit my family, and that maybe he was confused we tried to teach him French. We thought he was confused having to understand and speak 2 languages, but that really wasn't the reason. So he went to a preschool, and the preschool teacher said to me, Stefan doesn't do well with other children. He also has no eye contact. And I had no idea what she was talking about. Now you have to remember that was in 1973. So autism wasn't really a diagnosis that was given to anyone at the time. So we really had a hard time getting a diagnosis for Stefan. And I had read an article in Ladies' Home Journal that was written by Lee Salk, the brother of Jonas Salk. And Lee Salk was a well-known psychiatrist at the time, about unusual children. And I tracked him down and was able to get an appointment. And so we took Stefan to his townhouse on the Upper East Side and spent about 3 hours with him, and he observed Stefan, and then he told us that as far as he could tell, Stefan had autism, and we had never heard about it. So, typical reaction of a mother was, well, what do we do now? I mean, we need to help this child, and there really wasn't anything available at the time. So the good thing for us was that he was able to get us into a therapeutic nursery school at the New York University Hospital, and so we went there twice a week. There was counseling for the mothers, because we were those refrigerator mothers and didn't know how to raise our children. And then also some kind of counseling and play therapy for children. So it had really nothing to do with what we use now to treat children with autism.
How old was he when you moved down here?
He was about 8, 9. He was 9, yeah.
And were you in
8.5, really.
from New York to Philadelphia to
Right.
here? Yeah.
So you have to remember when Stefan was born, there was no right to special education. He was born in 1971. So by the time he was 5.5, there was finally some, and certainly no early intervention. So I did quit my job. I had to take care of him full time. I had no help. My parents weren't there to help me, and my mother-in-law, who lived close by, really, could do very little because he was a handful. So he went to 4 different nursery schools. It was always kind of okay in the beginning, and then about a month or 2 later, I would get a phone call and say that they just couldn't deal with him. And so when the Education of All Handicapped Children's Act, which is now IDEA, was passed, I enrolled him in a pre-K special education program. And so that was the very beginning of special education. It was a little difficult, it was a little helter-skelter, but he did have a very good young teacher who tried her very best to work with him. She had relatively little experience working with children with autism, but she just had a lot of energy and a lot of goodwill, and so that's kind of how he started going to school at about 2.5 hours a day, and then he would spend 2.5 hours on the bus.
And how did that go? Jeepers. Were there other children on that bus?
Yeah, there were these little, just like we call them special education buses, but the traffic in New York City being what it is, he actually liked the bus. He had no problem with the bus, no.
That was it.
Yeah. And then we moved to Delaware because my husband, who at the time worked for Pan American Airways, was offered a position in Philadelphia as a regional manager. So we first looked for services in Philadelphia, but we're told that there's a 6-month period during which they're not going to provide services, which, now if you think of it now, people would say, what? But then we heard about a school in Delaware, which at the time was a school for children with intellectual disabilities, the Bush School.
Yeah.
And actually one of the gentlemen who worked for my husband told him about that because he lived in Delaware. So we went to look at the school, and we liked the school, and we liked the teacher who actually had just come from the Eau Claire school, so she had some experience working with children with autism. And so he started going to the Bush School, and there were other children there who also had a similar diagnosis. But then I connected with a group of parents who had children with autism of all ages. The oldest at the time I think was 14, and the youngest was Stefan, actually. And they had passed legislation, got a legislation passed, but that was signed by then Governor Pierre Dupont, and the legislation essentially mandated a program for children with autism within the special education realm and public education system. So these parents were really gung-ho on making this work because they had this really important legislation in hand, and they wanted to get a program started. So I started kind of meeting with them and going to their meeting and got involved. And ultimately, we were able to get a program started in Newark, in the wing of an elementary school at Jenny Smith.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't, we had a Dr. Skinner who was very good at writing legislation. He wasn't always successful at passing it, getting it passed, but he definitely was very good at writing it and getting information. So we kind of became a team. He would gracefully hand me the legislation and said, and then he was a dentist, and he would say, I have to go to a dental convention in London, but when I come back, I expect this to be passed. Yeah, he was very interesting, but he's the kind of person you'd first think, oh, well, who does he think he is? But, he meant so well, and he was so resourceful and really very good at minute, like technical legislative stuff that he was so valuable. And, you know, I had no problem getting legislation passed that could use charm and all kind of things. So, you know, I had the tools. I just needed the talent, so I tried to.
So it was a good partnership?
Yeah, it was a good partnership. You know, got a little tense at times because, you know, it's very hard when you try to get a program off the ground. But we did our homework. You know, we went to North Carolina. We looked at the TEACH program, which was the only program at the time in the country that actually specifically provided services for children with autism. We did a lot of research before the internet, you know, always trying to point that out. That was a lot more difficult. So I think we were a very dedicated, methodical and group of people. You know, we had figured out, and that's one thing I figured out very early on, working with the legislatures, that we had to do the legwork. They could help us, you know, institutionalize what we want, but we had to do the research and we had to present them with the information because we couldn't ask them to do that. So that was, so we were able to get legislation passed for the program. I mean, that was passed. We were able to establish the program. It started with about 4 classrooms and it just started growing. And the first director for the program didn't work out very well. The subsequent director, Dr. Andy Bondi, was a really good director. He had started as a psychologist under the previous director and then took over. And the program was really a model program that worked well for many years. And we had parents moving from other states to come to Delaware because of the program. It's also the program that started the picture exchange system for communication for children who are nonverbal. So he really, I think, helped us, you know, make this program into the good program that it was, and to an extent still is. So that's kind of.
And
you know.
what years are you talking about?
So it's talking about 80s and 90s. My son graduated in 92 from that program. And of course, you know, we had more and more children diagnosed. We had more parents moving to Delaware because of the program. So the program grew very rapidly. But during that time, I started working on adult services because one thing I had realized was that we collectively realized, the programs for adults were not really equipped to handle our children and their behavioral difficulties. Also, as part of the education program, the Delaware Autism Program, which it was called, we were able to get funding from the legislature to open 2 residential programs. So as the children got older, over 12 and 13, and started showing some very significant behavioral challenges, they would spend part-time, you know, somewhere they're full-time, somewhere they're part-time, for staff to work on behavior. So the program was not just a group home, it was an educationally based program, and the services were tied in with the IEP. So it worked really well because it was constant teaching going on. And also data, that program was very much based on the use of data collection and using data to improve services and address the needs of the students.
So in this time period, he was staying there or coming home every day?
He was coming home. He started out going 2 days a week. So initially we didn't have a program there. We used some facility at Governor Bacon. Then we were able, so I personally worked very hard at the vocational program, working with legislatures, because one of the things that had happened in the meantime, with the first legislation, we started having friends in the legislature.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, there was a Senator Burns, who was I'm sure you've heard of him. I met him in the supermarket with Stefan, and Stefan had this kind of unusual and unfortunate habit of popping the lids of yogurt containers. And he got a great thrill out of seeing the yogurt pour out.
Oops.
And Senator Byrd was in the same supermarket, I think it was the A&P at the time, and he saw that, and he was just a wonderful gentleman, and he came up to me and very quietly said to me, "That's very unusual behavior. What is your child's disability?" And I told him, then he told me about his grandson, and that his grandson had Down syndrome, and we started chatting, and then I was telling him about my involvement with the Autism Society. At the time it was called the Autism Society of Delaware. And so he was very helpful in helping us get legislation to fund the residential programs, which are, the 24-hour residential is part of the program, and then subsequently also helped us get program that specifically addressed the needs of adults with autism. I also became I had a friend, her name was Ginger Galley, and she and I were called the Autistic Ladies. We would go to the controller's office, and at the time Pete Ross was in the controller's office, and his John Fraser was also in that same office. And they would see us coming and they'd say, oh no, there come the Autistic Ladies, they want something. So, I would bake cookies and bring them cookies and said, yes, we want to know how much does it cost to educate a child in the school system, how much is there available for adult services, so we try to get a lot of information from them. We even managed to get them to go to a conference on autism in, I think it was also in North Carolina. They attended the conference. They came to visit my son at work several times where he was working. He had actually graduated with a job. One of the things that the autism program did very well, they did prepare people for adulthood. And so he started working while he was still in school. So we really had formed, a friendship. And that was very important because at the time, there were very few children with that diagnosis. And I think Delaware at the time also financially was in very good shape. And so I think it was, for them, it was kind of a drop in the bucket and it made them feel good. And I think they were truly interested. I always felt that the people we worked with, we worked with Senator Holloway, who was very interested in
That's a nice old man.
Yeah. In what we wanted to do for our children, Senator Byrne I just mentioned, our friends in the controller's office. I mean, we had a lot of support. We also had to work very hard, For instance, the legislation, we also had people in the Department of Education who supported us. I think it was Mr. Keene at the time. And so they were supportive. So everybody really wanted to help us, and that was really, made the big difference.
And Jane Maroney and Margaret Rose?
Jane Maroney came a little bit later. Jane Maroney helped us with the adult services more, and Margaret Rose also toward the end. So yeah, Jane Maroney was much more focused on early intervention, but she definitely was a great supporter. I mean, she never opposed anything for sure, and neither did Margaret Rose. Yeah, and we now continue to work with Margaret Rose as well. Yeah, she's a great lady.
Yes.
So that's kind of the story, but it's been a long, hard road.
Yeah. Tell me about this Public Law 94-142 that passed in July 75. It was education for all handicapped children. How old was he then?
He was 5.5.
Oh.
Yeah.
So what?
4.5. Sorry, 4.5.
How did it impact his life at all?
As I just mentioned, I mean, he was able to go to school.
Yeah.
I didn't have to send him to a private preschool. He had special educators. It was a little shaky in the beginning.
Yeah.
People, I mean, it came about very quickly. So, I mean, it was a godsend for families with children with disabilities. I mean, before that, I don't know where I would have sent him to school other than preschool, but he was young. I met other parents at the time too, as part of an autism support group in Manhattan, and they had older children, and their children had never been to school.
Oh.
And they were, 6, 7, 8 years old. So it was very important. I mean, it was really a godsend for us.
And in 1987, when you started this Parent Information Center, where was that and how did that work?
Well, Parent Information Center, actually, the organization itself existed.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't, so as part of the public law, which now, I mean, it's really IDA. As part of IDA, there is a provision for parent information in education centers, and the parent information centers are in part funded by the U.S. Department of Education, and the premise is that there's at least one in every state. And the reason behind those centers was that for parents to be equal partners in their children's education, as it is, written in the law, they had to know the law, they had to know how to apply it, and they had to also learn how to interact with professionals. And so that's not something that you learn either very quickly or very well on your own. So those centers are designed to provide problem solving, information, training, and support to families of children with disabilities who attend public schools. So from birth to, because in the meantime, we also had Part C, which is the early education legislation that was passed in '81. So we had, all of that. I think it was '81, it was the early '80s. So we had, parents of children of all ages up to age 22. So that's what Parent Information Center provided in Delaware.
And was it in Dover?
No, it was actually up in Newark. And as I said, I took over the organization. It was at the end of I think 3-year grant. And the first thing I did was to write a grant for another 5 years. So just to keep the organization going. The first grant, I think, was a kind of a foot in the door grant. It wasn't very well funded. So I also changed some of the things from the original grant. I had people who were then housed in Lewis and in southern Delaware and in Dover, so that we were spread across the state, yeah.
And how many employees did it have?
I started out actually with about 5 employees, all of them part-time. And then we had many grants over the years. We had took on a very large federal grant to provide that same kind of service to families of children who didn't have disabilities. So really just promoting parental engagement. And at the time we had 12 employees. So it varied depending on the funding.
And does it still exist?
Oh, yeah.
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 And what happened in this recent budget thing? Just that 20% down?
Are you talking about the federal budget? I think they weren't touched. So the parent centers actually, from what I understand, are unscathed. Now, their funding isn't very much to begin with.
Yeah.
So it is a nonprofit organization. We always had to look for additional funding. I think where I was fortunate, always had a good partnership with our Department of Education. So our, Delaware Department of Education always generously supported us, and we would have contracts to provide certain services and training. We've worked with the Center for Disability Studies. So it's a lot about also, partnerships and kind of maximizing existing services or in collaboration with other entities, create new services.
So it's a nice network.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's cool.
Yeah.
What about the increase in the number of autistic kids? Is that just because they changed the way they're diagnosed, or there's really a greater number of them?
Well, so we looked at autism as a single disability. Now we're looking at autism as a spectrum disability. So it could go from someone who has very mild manifestation of autism to somebody who has a very severe, such as my son, who's 46 but really functions at a 3.5-year-old level. So that is one reason. The other is that the diagnostic tools have become a lot better. So for instance, as I said earlier, it was very difficult for us to get a diagnosis because there really weren't any tools to diagnose autism accurately. So I think that has changed a lot. I think parents are more aware, teachers are more aware, children are being diagnosed in school, which initially they probably weren't. So I think it's a combination of all of those. And the fact that we are, diagnosing autism of the Asperger type that was not diagnosed in the past. So that really, did swell the numbers.
So it's not that there's actually more kids, it's just a
There
change
also
of
are
kids.
probably more kids. It's just hard to kind of, decide which really is the determining factor.
Yeah.
I think it's a combination, and most people will say it's a combination of all of the above.
Well, it's so tricky because when I was a kid, they had special education in the schools, but they were Down syndrome and other
Yeah,
things.
Right,
But-
they were the visible disabilities. Now we
Yeah.
have many children who have invisible disabilities,
And this
children
is
with
one.
learning disabilities, children with, who are on the spectrum, whether it's Asperger or, so children who have behavioral health issues. I mean, we can't tell by looking at them,
Yeah. So
which is good, I think,
yes, it is. Some of the autistic kids are really beautiful to look at too.
Yeah, they are, but so many other children are too.
Tell me about the group home effort.
The adult,
Yeah.
so they've always, when my son graduated or was ready to graduate, actually I have to say that I became really involved in looking at adult services by the time my son was about 12. I started thinking about it, and the one reason I started thinking about it, I had learned that it takes about 5 to 6 years to get anything off the ground. The other thing I had, in the meantime, I'd become guardian to a young man with autism who was a foster child, and he was quite a bit older than Stefan, and I was very concerned about him. And then I knew other parents who had older children, and they were worried. And so I think collectively, we said we have to see how our children, by then adults, will fit into an existing model of group homes where there isn't much happening. People are verbal and they can express their wishes, or people have higher skills. But what we had seen just in looking at group homes and visiting different agencies was that there wasn't much going on. And we had children who graduated from the Delaware Autism knowing how to swim. My son learned he can swim, he can ride a bike independently. He, had certainly enough independent skills. He could dress himself. He does still need help with some self-care skills, such as showering and toothbrushing. But they had some really solid leisure skills, and we didn't want them to lose that. And so we wanted to have agencies that were able to provide them with that support. But the most important part for us were the behaviors. The existing, at the time, the agencies that had group homes didn't serve individuals who had severe and challenging behaviors. People with autism, including my own son, can be aggressive. They can, be self-injurious, dangerously self-injurious. They can be destructive. So these are things that no one really, they just didn't know how to do that. So that was our focus. We wanted to have a program that would be able to address all of those things that were important to us. But we also were very interested in having a program that would continue their employment. So a number of students at the time were graduating from the autism program with a job. So my son My son had a job at a local supermarket. He still works there, actually, at a ShopRite, and I wanted to make sure he kept that job. Other students were working for a time at Rickles. I don't know if you remember that. It was before Home Depot, right? And we wanted to make sure they kept those jobs. Well, typically, the agencies at the time, people weren't graduating with jobs. So, actually, my son was the first individual who graduated with a supported employment job with a job coach. So, we wanted to make sure that we kept all those things we had worked for so hard.
Wow.
So that's why we worked with the legislatures, and they created something called a post-21 program for adults with behavioral challenges and I think it was behavioral challenges and exceptional needs. So that included people with autism. We also became good friends with families who had children with Prader-Willi syndrome, so these more exceptional and challenging disabilities, and were funded for this post-21 program, so, which in the meantime has been kind of absorbed in the overall DDDS service delivery.
So it's kind of there, but
Yeah, I was a little annoyed that they just kind of, very quietly did away with it, so.
I think so. How long did it last?
I'd say about, we had a director, had several directors, I would say about 15 years or so, yeah. But I mean, the services are still there, they're just not concentrated, and you have to fight for them again, it's not, you have to kind of point out that there are needs that they have to pay attention to.
That are real. And he lives in a group home now?
Yes.
Where is it?
The group home is, so we also, one of the things we had done, we had bought a house for him. Because one of the issues we had with the early, like any early new services, there were these agencies that were hired to provide the services were at first not very good. So we had to continue, working with the state. One of the agencies, Growth Horizons, we basically were able to have their contract terminated. Actually, Pat Michael was very instrumental in helping us with that. And then we had other, a myriad of other agencies come in and try and, none of them were ever 100% of what we really wanted, but at least we could work with them. So, sorry, what did you ask me? Cut.
And how is the group home staffed? And how many kids are there?
Right.
Adults?
So we bought the home because they were putting people in these apartments, and one of the apartment complexes was at Lancaster Court. And Lancaster Court was at the time like drug trading capital of Delaware. And our son's apartment was broken into several times, and so we were just beside ourselves. And so we decided, we talked with the director of DDDS at the time and said, if we buy a home, will you give us the services? Yes, we would do that. So we bought a home in Devon, Firethorn Court. It's a little neighborhood of Newark. It's in a cul-de-sac. It's a very nice home. But then, unfortunately, the state did not give us any money to maintain the home, so that was difficult for us to do. And so ultimately, we had to pay for some of the repairs ourselves. But then at the time, then I did talk with the director and said, look, something has to give here. And what the state recognized was that while they wanted to have homes that were independent of the agencies, one of the things we had learned was that when you let an agency go, like we did with Growth Horizons, if they owned the homes, the people they were literally on the street because they took that with them. So, or they sold it, whatever. So that's one thing that the state didn't want to ever happen again, and so they decided to create this program with the ARC, and where the ARC buys and manages homes, which are tied in with Mickey's Homes for Life, but except these are HUD homes versus some of the other homes that the ARC manages. So that, I think, was a good idea. It was, we didn't have to worry about paying, for the repairs for a home where many other, 3 other individuals lived as well. And so we sold the home to the ARC. And so, but for us it was great because it was, first of all, it was a really good experience. We could get him to live what we wanted him to live. And you also had a little more autonomy, as long as we had the home, we could decide what we wanted it to look like. And so it did help. And I think it was good because in the end it helped to create the ARC home program.
And talk about the ARC. What is it? What
It's
does it mean?
Well, it used to be the Association for Retarded Citizens in the Dark Ages. It is now called something totally different, but the acronym remains. So we talk about the ARC, and it's essentially a very large, well-known organization that provides, supports individuals with intellectual disabilities.
And in these group homes, did you have staff people living in there?
They don't live there. We started out with live-in staff and found out that that didn't work
It didn't
very
work.
well.
So
No.
what happens in the night?
They have people there overnight.
Oh, they do?
Yeah, so we had legislation passed with this program, post-21 program. It mandated how many staff there would be, but it all changed over time because, you know, the DDDS, Division of Developmental Disability Services, you know, they had started assessing people differently by using ICAP, you know, new assessment. So things evolved. I mean, Stefan has been in adult services way over 20 years, and so things have changed.
And how does he get up in the morning and get to work?
He gets up in the morning, he gets help getting a shower and, you know, dresses himself. Someone comes, I mean, he's in the home with 3 other individuals, and all 3 other individuals also have autism. The staff, he's kind of, you know, staff ratio is maybe 2 to 1, sometimes 1-on-1, depending on the activity. So it's okay as long as the agency is responsible. We continue to have issues with staff training, you know, but then it's very difficult to get really good staff and to train staff when you have a lot of turnover. And the turnover is mainly because they're so poorly paid. And if we don't, as a state, or even as a nation, value people who take care of people who need support, then we're always going to have dismal services, you know. I think that's kind of a foregone conclusion. So until we can pay people better, and I know there's a bill right now in committee to increase the salaries for direct support staff. So,
That's good.
well, I don't know if it'll pass.
Well, maybe not this year, we don't know. What committee is handling it?
I think it's House Bill 104. I don't know, probably Human Resources or something. Yeah, I have to look it up.
House Bill 104, so keep track of it. And so what is your defining moment? You've had a long career with this issue, and what stands out most in your mind of the things that you've accomplished or seen?
I think the parents.
Mm-hmm.
The parents and people who respected our concerns, who understood the difficulty we had, and who, you know, would put politics aside and support us. That to me is probably what I will always remember. But parents, yeah, I mean, you know, it's kind of nice to be able to talk to people who walk in the same kind of pair of shoes, literally. So yeah.
Tell me about your governor's volunteer award. That was a nice thing you got. You deserved it.
It was an award. I actually have gotten several. It was a very nice one. I had no idea that I had been nominated. I mean, obviously I had to submit some information, but I was very honored. It was a little awkward standing on the stage when Governor Markell said to me, "See, can you think of all the people you've helped?" And I'm like, So anyway, yeah, it was very nice, very nice.
And sometime you had said you were always thinking 5 years ahead of
Yes,
what
I am.
those need. So what are you thinking now?
Well, now I'm thinking of what's going to happen when I die. That's not a very pleasant subject. So we've tried several things in planning, and again, I think at this point, I hope I'm planning at least 10,
Maybe
not 5
20.
years, maybe 15 years ahead. But things do move a little slower nowadays. So I don't really know. We for a while thought maybe we can move to Texas, and we kind of crossed that off because Austin is wonderful for many things, but Texas is not a state where people with disabilities or people with any kind of special needs are particularly important.
Mm-hmm.
So I think to my daughter's great despair, she really wanted us to be closer. We might not do that. So I'm thinking of a project that I'm actually working with Autism Delaware, a a project where we would hire and train specific advocates to basically become the parent per se. They would replace the parent and would do the things that parents would do to make sure that their adult child has a good life. And so that's, in a nutshell, what I'm working on. The people would be paid, they would not be volunteers. So many of us obviously are thinking about the future and putting money aside for services. It could also be that maybe some state agencies would pay for part of it. Maybe DDDS, when things get better, might think that's a valuable service, but that's kind of the idea I have that I'm working on right now.
And where would you draw these people from?
Well, the way it could be retired teachers. So I took the idea from a program that exists in the schools, which is called an educational surrogate program that is administered by Parent Information Center. And I have been an educational surrogate parent, still am, for a child. And I really replace the parent for the education piece. I go to IEP meetings, I visit his classroom, I do all of the things that parents do. And so that gave me the idea we could do something similar for adults. Now the difference is that the educational surrogate parent program is a volunteer program. I find that it's very difficult to have consistency with volunteers if you make it a job, and that's why I'm working with Autism Delaware, because they would be administering the program, and so it could be many people, it could be teachers, it could be other parents. I think if we really, you have to have people who really have an interest in doing this. So it's kind of I think of it as a volunteer job with a little perk. You still get a little bit of money, but you also do something really valuable.
Okay. So, what other kind of partners are out there?
What other partners are there where?
For the world of autism in general?
Well, there are a lot of things going on in autism. Large association, Autism Speaks, as I'm sure everybody's heard of Autism Speaks. Autism Delaware is a pretty large organization by now. They have we have a very good employment program called Power, very innovative program. So we're looking at probably expanding into some residential options, but we're thinking more in terms of people sharing apartments, so families or homes where families would purchase the home and then contract the services with the support of, Medicaid funding or waiver funding. So really looking at, we'd like to get away from the typical group home, big agencies, multi-state, providers with very high overhead. We really want to kind of start doing something that, like Power, that is homegrown, that is in Delaware, there's very little overhead, and more of the funding will actually go to the individuals. And the one thing that bothered me from the very beginning were these agencies that come in, they're housed in Baltimore or Harrisburg, and they have, 100 groups home in one state, 50 in another, and it's just, and by the time the funding that they have to provide services, by the time it gets to the level of the individual in the personal and the direct support staff, there's no money left, really. It's all basically supporting this huge bureaucracy, and that to me is not necessary anymore. We're pretty creative, we can do better than that. And parents, if they want to participate, should be able to. And right now, the system doesn't really allow you to do that. It's kind of one size fits all. And it's very difficult for families who are not able to get a slot in a group home, and then they have nothing or very little, and that's not, we can do better. We can give everyone a little bit more, and we can participate if you're able to.
It's hard, huh? Tell me about your Parent Leadership Academy.
The Parent Leadership Academy is really based on my own experience, because I really didn't have very good skills to begin with, but I did hone them over the years and learned a lot. And in one of the grants, we used to apply for grants every 3 to 5 years. I wrote in that we wanted to provide that kind of leadership experience for families so that they didn't have to start from scratch and kind of fall flat on their face, and they would know exactly what to do when and what circumstance and how to deal with professionals and the information that they needed to know, understanding systems. You can't work with a system if you don't know how it operates and if you don't know the players. And so that's really what that's based on.
So it's sort of like an apprenticeship for parents?
Yeah, that's right. And then it actually did have an apprenticeship piece. It had an intern piece. So after the second session, so there were leadership 1 and 2. After the second, so we typically had like 3 days. It's a little bit like the DD Council has that program. I can't think of it right now. Where families and consumers go and have this advocacy training, very concentrated advocacy training. This is a little bit the same model, but it's focused on schools. So it's really focused on dealing with schools, with service, related service agencies and providers and other families, and how to start a support group. It's kind of a toolkit for a parent of a child with a disability.
So sort of a who you gonna call thing?
Who are you going to call and what are you going to say?
Yeah.
What are you not going to say? Don't threaten people right off the bat and things like that. Yeah.
That's good.
Better to, smear a little honey on things before you start blasting people.
And what about institutions? Don't get her started. Huh? He's never been in London.
Mm-hmm. No.
So what is the kind of majors of people that are trained to work with the autistic children? Are they sociology, psychology,
Well, in the
doctors?
school they're teachers, obviously special education teachers.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in adult services, they're none of that.
Oh.
No.
So are kids trained in college how to deal with autistic children?
Well,
or is
if
it so generic they don't?
It depends. Usually special education teachers, like in Delaware, they have to take a course, which is kind of a supplemental autism certification. Unfortunately, I think they have up to 3 or 4 years to get that certification. So that gives us a little bit more, assurance that they're going to be able to teach children with autism. But overall, it really has to do with school district's ability to provide, personnel development. It has to do with the state making sure that people are equipped to teach kids with autism. So, it's like with everything else, we have some really, really great teachers, and we have some teachers who need help.
Mm-hmm.
And teachers want help. I mean, we know that. One of the things that we developed as part of the original autism program were several safeguards. One is a state monitoring review board that actually allows the director of the autism program to go and observe classrooms and work with different sites. And as part of that, there's a group of professionals and one parent advocate. And so I was on that for many years. And I learned that teachers really want help. They really want that, These are very challenging kids, and they really deserve everything there is to help them do the job that they want to do.
And I can't imagine having disruptive kids in a classroom of 20 or 30 other kids that have to focus.
They're much smaller groups. So again, as part of that initial autism legislation for program, there's a ratio, which kind of now fell by the wayside because we have this non-categorical funding. But typically the classrooms are, 1 teacher, 4 students, 1 para, 2 para,
So they're not mainstream then?
Some, if they are higher functioning and they can actually fully participate in the general education curriculum, absolutely. But not, certainly, my son has never been in a classroom of more than 6 kids.
And that's about as much as we could.
It's about as much as he can handle, and they can handle.
Yeah, I think so. What about ADA? Did that come before or after he was born? And
Oh,
what
no, that
difference
came
has
way
it made?
after. And the ADA, I think, is really, I think it was passed when he was still a teenager, well, late teens. I think the ADA, in my view, may not have certainly didn't help him directly. But I think the ADA opened our eyes to people with disabilities and their rightful place in society. I think that's what the ADA did. It forced employers to hire people with disabilities, and I think many do that very willingly, unfortunately not enough. It also, forced us to make life a little more pleasant for people with disabilities. We have curb cuts, we have all kinds of things. I think my development finally put in curb cuts 2 years ago. So, which is great when you have a baby stroller or roller skates. So I think that's what it did. I think it just opened everybody's eyes to people with disabilities as being, equals.
Yeah.
That's what people with disabilities are, equals, not before where, we looked at them and said, oh, those poor people have a disability. They're part of the society and they're right there with us. And so they need some accommodations, big deal. We can do that.
So, if somebody was going to write a biography about you or something, what do you want the future to know about you? What would you say about you?
Well, I would say that I have one thing is I just don't quit. Don't quit.
Yeah.
That's about all.
And that's a good philosophy, right?
Keep at it.
Um,
Yeah, keep at it. And try to be positive about things. Even things sometimes you can really get down on things, get very depressed, but you have to pick up. And I always think I really never enjoy my victories very much because I'm already planning for the next thing, which one of my staff always said, can't you just relax and enjoy, what you've accomplished? And I said, no, I can't because now I have this I need to work on.
It never ends.
Right.
Oh, that's great. Can you think of anything else you'd like to say for the good of the cause?
I think parents have to get involved. This is one thing that I noticed toward the end when I was working at a Parent Information Center toward the end before I retired. I was getting very discouraged because I found that parents wanted everything done for them. They wanted an immediate solution. They were always being unhappy about everything. And that to me is very counterproductive. So you don't always get everything you want. If you get something you want, it's good. Always go to the table with a plan B. That was the philosophy we used at Parent Information Center when we attended meetings with parents, and we'd brief them, go with your plan A, but we have to have a plan B. So I think I want parents to really understand how much power they have if they really work at it and they inform themselves. They can't ask other people to do the thinking for them, and they can't ask the other people to do the learning for them. They have to do that.
Well, I always like people power, so I'm
Yeah.
all about it.
Right.
So thank you very much. This was great.
Thank you.
And I
Thank you
hope-
for the opportunity.